Hi, everyone.
Hello again. Ray Franz goes on analyzing why it is still a difficult transition today. That is the transition from world within the Watchtower to world outside the Watchtower. In his chapter, A Congregation of Free People, page 667 of In Search of Christian Freedom. In the first century, many obviously did make the needed transition and learned that service to God, worship, did not consist of, depend on, or gain special merit from attendance at some special place, some sacred building. Even the act of gathering together was not to be viewed as distinctively religious, that is, more so than other facets of their lives. They came to appreciate that their gathering together was for mutual edification and expression of brotherly love, in encouraging one another, manifesting appreciation from one another as part of a family relationship under God's Son, not to give them a special feeling of religiousness or a sense of being religiously cleansed by the act of gathering.
Whatever progress was made in viewpoint in apostolic times, in subsequent periods professed Christians made a gradual but steady return to much of the old. They returned in large measure to that which appeals to the physical senses. Over a period of centuries they reverted once more to sacred buildings, visible altars, a separate class of special servants of God, whether priests or ministers, distinctively dressed, and to many similar things that impress the eye and appeal to the ear, and that can be touched. Under the seductive influence of such things, understanding was all too often supplanted by mere emotional feeling. The Lord's evening meal, initially characterized by informal closeness and warm fellowship and an expression of a faith shared in common, was often converted into a largely ceremonial observance, the partaker going up to a church official who, in priestly fashion, administered the sacrament. The people, the laity, felt comfortable in their relationship to God by virtue of their regularity at religious services, or by performing certain religious acts on a regular basis. This, coupled with the knowledge that they were generally part of a large religious system and affiliation, gave them a sense of security and of righteousness. They failed to appreciate the excelling spiritual value of the new because of its bareness, and showed a preference for an outward glory like that of the old. And despite their claiming great distinctiveness from other religions, I believe that Jehovah's Witnesses manifest many of these same evidences of a return to the old.
Those associated with Jehovah's Witnesses are repeatedly reminded of their being part of a large organization, it even being pointed out that their numbers surpass that of some of the smaller nations of the world. They are frequently told that at certain stages of the organization's history, God has brought forth revelations, revealed truth, new light, through it, as he did by speaking through his prophets of old. They have been taught to live in strict obedience to a remarkably extensive code of laws, handed down to them by men who claim to represent God in doing so, with rejection of their rulings being likened to Miriam and Aaron's rebellion against Moses. A steady flow of figures of numerical increase comes to them through the organization's publications. They periodically see pictures of large impressive buildings in different countries, built or purchased by the organization, places designated Bethels from the Hebrew Beth El, meaning house of God. Many of these structures equal or surpass the Jerusalem temple grounds in size and area. Some make group pilgrimages to the international headquarters at Brooklyn, the principal house of God, where the organization has very large multi-storied properties covering many entire city blocks, or to the Bethel structure of their own country. They see they see House of God staffs numbering perhaps into the hundreds, sometimes into the thousands, engaged in what is officially designated sacred service, thus comparable to the service of the Levitical workers at the temple of old. The impact on their sight and minds conveys a sense of power, visible strength. They feel drawn to it and fearful of being separated from it. Again, I'm struck by the stark contrast that Ray paints of it's either or.
Yeah, he does seem to be drawing a line there. It's either very small, and only small is good, and large is bad. I think the difference with Christendom, so I feel uncomfortable with a lot of what he's saying. In the New Testament, there was leadership.
Yeah.
So when he says this thing about, a separate class of special servants of God, well, in the New Testament, there were elders. There were people with some authority in the congregation that you had to listen to, and that instructed you out of love. They did this, so they didn't abandon the thing that they had before, elders.
No.
And leadership. That's needed in any group. Otherwise, everyone is just me and God, and nobody's listening to anybody else, and there's no means of any kind of discipline either.
And accountability.
So I think the difference between what he's picturing here and what is in truth there in Christendom is that they do tend to encourage both. So even within a larger church, they will break off into smaller groups for things. They try and encourage small groups because that's where you're going to have a little more intimacy, a little more opening up. People talk more when they're in a smaller group. So they see this. And there's dialogue about it. You can find hundreds of books about church fellowships,
how to do it better.
Small groups, and new ideas of how to do church in a way that encourages that intimacy.
Yeah, I think we should say that we in our 32 years out of the Watchtower have been in both big churches, medium churches, and small house churches. We've done it all. And all of them have strengths and all of them have weaknesses.
Right. And even when we did have a house fellowship that we were part of, the decision that we made as a group was not to just keep it to just us. Because if you keep it to just a small fellowship of a few families where you're all coming together because you think alike and you want the same things, there's always that danger of it being
stale.
Yeah, and you're not getting any new information or any anything that would put a stop to a bad tendency.
No challenges coming
Right.
at you, and it's very hard to create your own goals and challenges. You need outside stimulation. So that's one of the weaknesses of the house fellowship, and we notice too, it can get rather incestuous.
Yeah, you need
Not
accountability.
not in the obvious way. It's incestuous in the sense that you begin to think that you're the people that God is using, as Russell and the Russellites did.
Yeah, you're never hearing opposing points of view or ideas.
We're going to link to a video that contrasts an earlier section of Ray Franz's work, where he contrasts Russell's attitude towards big religion, big church, and denominations, and basically says organization is of the devil. So how do we get to this that Ray is decrying here? But I fear sometimes that Ray is trying to return us to the Russell days, i.e. reject them, the people outside the church, and start your own thing, which is better.
But keep it smaller and don't have any controlling factors like leaders or everybody on the same level. Well, that doesn't work.
It doesn't work, and everybody changes from that to something more structured.
Yeah.
And Ray, of course, died at the age of 88, not having ever experienced, from my knowledge anyway, the life in church. And that's the great problem for most of us who are coming out of the Watchtower. If we don't somehow come in contact with other people who help us burst the bubble and get past the prejudices we have with witnesses, we might drift.
Yeah.
might drift endlessly, like the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years, a trip that could have taken 11 days. Should have taken 11 days if they'd gone in a straight line.
Yeah.